There are things you can do here in Japan, out in the open and fully within the law, that would put you on the wrong side of a courtroom in other parts of the world. Most people picture Japan as a land of rigid rules, where every step is measured and every custom is followed to the letter. That picture is not wrong, but it is far from complete. Once you look closely at the law here, you find quiet corners that will make a visitor stop and tilt their head, wondering how something so ordinary in Tokyo could be forbidden back home. I have made videos before about the many things you cannot do in Japan, the small courtesies and firm boundaries that shape daily life. This time I want to turn that idea around and walk with you through 9 things that are legal here yet restricted or outright banned somewhere else in the world. Some of these grow out of old traditions, some come from a different way of weighing personal freedom against public order. All of them tell you something true about how this country really works. Before we begin, let me be honest with you. The way my grandmother taught me to be. I do not recommend that anyone go and do any of these things. This is not legal advice, and I am not a lawyer. Think of it as understanding, nothing more, a way of seeing how law reflects the culture and history of a people rather than a set of instructions to follow. My name is Kenji Sato, and I have spent my life keeping the old ways of Japan and learning how our country truly works. So if these journeys into culture and law interest you, consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind later. Now to the first of our 9, and it is one that has stirred real debate here at home. The first is the age of consent, and this one must be told carefully and in its proper order because the number that traveled around the world for so long is no longer the law. For more than a century, from 1907 onward, the age of consent written into Japan's penal code was 13. That figure stood untouched for over 100 years, and it was among the very lowest anywhere on Earth. Now the story is more layered than that single number suggests. Even while the national code held at 13, most prefectures had raised the effective age to somewhere between 16 and 18 through their own local ordinances, so daily reality in most of the country was stricter than the old headline ever admitted. The reason this belongs in a video about surprising law is that century of stillness, a national standard that outlasted generations while the world around it changed. Think of everything that happened in Japan across those 100 and more years. 2 great wars, a new constitution, the rise of the cities, the coming of trains and televisions and telephones, and through all of it, that single number in the penal code stayed exactly where the lawmakers of 1907 had set it. Laws can be strangely patient things, sitting on a page long after the world that wrote them has faded, until someone finally decides the moment has come to change them. In June of 2023, that moment arrived, and it finally ended. Japan raised the national age of consent to 16 and reshaped parts of its laws around consent at the same time, adding new protections and bringing the country closer to what many other nations already required. The change did not come from nowhere. It followed years of public discussion, court cases that troubled many people's sense of justice, and a growing feeling that the old code no longer matched the values of the country as it stands today. So if you have heard the old figure repeated somewhere, you now know the fuller truth. It was 13 for a very long time, unusually low by any measure, softened in practice by local rules in most prefectures, and lifted to 16 only recently. I share it as history and fact, and nothing more, and I will not dwell on it further than that. The second thing is marrying your cousin. Here in Japan, it is perfectly legal to marry your first cousin, and this is no modern loophole. The law dates back to the Meiji Civil Code, passed in 1898, when the country was building the legal framework of a modern state on top of very old family customs. It has been common enough over the years that we even have a word for it, itoko kon, cousin marriage, spoken without any shame attached. Several past prime ministers married their first cousins, and no one blinked. One of the practical reasons behind allowing it was to keep family wealth and property from scattering, holding land and name and fortune together within a single bloodline across the generations. That was a serious concern in an agricultural society where a family's fields were its future, and where a marriage was as much a joining of households as a joining of two hearts. In earlier times, a cousin was often someone already known and trusted, from a family whose character and standing you understood, and matches of that kind carried a certain quiet sense to them. So the law did not invent the custom. It simply gave legal shape to something that families had long found reasonable. Yet cross an ocean and the picture changes sharply. In some countries and in a good number of states within the United States, marrying your first cousin is against the law, treated as a line that should not be crossed, and in a few places it can even carry a criminal penalty. In others, it is allowed only under special conditions. Here in Japan, there is no such barrier. It is simply a personal choice, an ordinary one, resting on a foundation that history laid down more than a century ago, and never saw reason to remove. The third is defamation, and this one surprises almost everyone who hears it because in Japan you can be found guilty of defaming someone even when what you said is completely true. In many places, truth is a full defense, a shield you can raise and walk away clean. Here, the law protects a person's honor and public standing as something valuable in its own right, whether or not the words spoken about them are accurate. What matters is the harm to their dignity in the eyes of society. There are 3 main things the courts weigh. First, the statement must be shared with the general public rather than whispered between two people. Second, it must reveal specific facts, true or not, rather than a vague opinion. Third, it must damage the person's honor, either in how others see them or in how they see themselves. So telling your coworkers or the wider world that your boss is having an affair, even if you have proof, can count as defamation here. There are sensible exceptions, of course, for matters of genuine public interest and for whistleblowing that exposes real fraud or wrongdoing. Two real cases show how this plays out. In one, a person whose affair had been exposed to others by a third party sued for defamation, and the court awarded them roughly 100,000 yen. Notice what that means. The relationship may well have been real, the words about it accurate, and still the exposure itself was judged a harm worth compensating because it stripped away the person standing before others. In another case, a magazine published an anonymous report about a serious sexual assault incident without ever printing the real name, yet the court still ruled in favor of the subject because the person could be identified from the surrounding details and awarded around 4.4 million yen. I mentioned that second case plainly and with respect for everyone involved, and I will leave the details where they belong. To understand why the law leans this way, you have to understand how much weight honor carries in Japanese life. A person's face, their reputation, their standing among neighbors and colleagues, these have long been treated as something close to sacred, a possession as real as a house or a field. To damage them carelessly is to take something from a person that cannot easily be given back. The point of law here is simply this: truth alone does not always protect you, because the harm the law is watching for is not the lie, it is the wound to another person's honor. The fourth thing sits at the table, quite literally, because it is about food. In Japan, hunting whales and dolphins is legal, and eating certain marine animals that many nations forbid is part of a long coastal tradition. Shark fin is legal too, more commonly seen than the rest, often served in Chinese restaurants as an expensive delicacy rather than an everyday meal. To a great many people abroad, all of this is deeply objectionable. Here, it is a matter of settled law and old custom. In 2019, Japan formally left the International Whaling Commission and resumed commercial whaling within its own waters, ending decades of a more limited arrangement. Joji Morishita, the man who negotiated that withdrawal, described the question of eating whale as a symbol of respect for different cultures, and many people here share the feeling that it is not right for outsiders to impose their own food customs on another nation. For coastal towns where whaling reaches back through many generations, it is not a novelty or a provocation, it is simply part of who they have always been, a craft and a food handed down like any other inheritance. I am not here to argue that side or the other, and I know feelings on this run deep on every shore. My task is only to describe the law as it stands. Whether you agree or disagree, the fact remains that eating these foods is legal in Japan, shark fin among them, and that reflects a relationship with the sea that stretches back centuries in an island nation that has always fed itself from the water around it. Law, once again, following culture rather than leading it. The fifth is the humble cigarette, and there are two quiet surprises folded into it. The first is that you can still buy cigarettes from a vending machine here, standing on the street, as long as you are of legal age and hold the age verification card that unlocks the machine. That card system was built to keep minors out, and the country is now moving toward newer methods of checking age, but the machines themselves remain a familiar sight. In many nations, selling tobacco from an unattended machine on a public street would be unthinkable. The second surprise is where you are still allowed to smoke. Since April of 2020, Japan tightened its rules and prohibited most indoor smoking. A real change for a country that once let people light up almost anywhere inside, in offices, in trains, in the corner of a coffee shop, without a second thought. Yet exemptions remain, and they are the interesting part. You can still smoke in some hotel rooms set aside for it, in cigar bars built around the pleasure of tobacco, and in certain small bars and restaurants that were already operating before the 2020 rules took effect and met the particular conditions that let them keep their smoking rooms. The law drew its new line, but it did so with an eye to the small businesses that had lived by the old ways for years, rather than sweeping them all aside at once. So the country has traveled a long way from the days of smoke drifting across every dining room, and it did so at its own measured pace, tightening the center while leaving room for the old habits at the edges. That gradual hand, firm but unhurried, is very much how change tends to move here. The 16 pour is a little easier because it is alcohol from a vending machine. Just as with cigarettes, Japan has long allowed beer, sake, and other drinks to be sold from machines standing on the street or tucked into the corner of a shop. Japan is a country famous for its vending machines, hundreds of thousands of them scattered across every city and country lane, offering hot coffee and cold tea and nearly anything else you can imagine, so it is little wonder that alcohol found its way into them as well. These particular machines are far rarer now than they once were, mostly found in hotels, rural towns, and older neighborhoods, and where they still stand they lean on age verification to keep minors from using them. But the very idea alcohol dispensed by a machine with no clerk watching over the transaction is one that many countries would never permit and would treat as an open invitation to trouble. To buy a cold beer from a glowing box on a sidewalk at night is a small piece of ordinary Japanese life that would break the law in a great many places abroad. It rests on a certain trust, an assumption woven deep into the society here, that people will follow the rules even when no one is standing guard, that the machine does not need a watchman because the person in front of it already carries the rule inside them. Take that trust away, and the whole arrangement would fall apart. Here, more often than not, it holds. The seventh follows naturally from that beer, because here you are free to drink it right there in public. Japan has no broad open container law, and no general ban on drinking alcohol in the street, the park, the train station, or the riverbank. You can walk down the road with an open drink in your hand, share a bottle under the cherry blossoms in spring, or crack open a can on a long train ride, all within the law. For visitors from countries where an open container in public brings a fine or worse, this feels almost unbelievable. Nowhere is this seen more clearly than in spring, during Hanami, when whole families and offices spread their mats beneath the cherry blossoms and pass bottles and cups from morning into evening, celebrating the brief flowering of the trees. It is one of the most beloved customs in the country, and drink is woven right through it, out in the open, entirely lawful. The same holds at summer festivals and along riverbanks on warm nights, where a can in the hand raises no eyebrow at all. In much of the United States, and in many towns across the United Kingdom and elsewhere, drinking in public spaces is restricted or forbidden, controlled by local laws that can turn a casual sip on a park bench into an offense. Here, the freedom rests instead on an unspoken expectation of good behavior. You may drink where you like, but you are expected not to become a burden or a bother to those around you, not to cause what we call meiwaku, a nuisance to others. You clean up after yourself, you keep your voice down, you do not spoil the evening for anyone else. The law grants the liberty, and the culture supplies the restraint. That balance, trust extended by the law and manners returned by the people, tells you a great deal about how order is kept in this country. It is held together less by the threat of punishment than by a shared sense of how one ought to behave. The eighth thing is pachinko, and to understand why it belongs here, you have to understand a contradiction at the heart of Japanese law. Most forms of gambling are illegal in Japan. Betting for cash is broadly forbidden, and yet the country is filled with vast, bright, thundering halls where people feed steel balls into upright machines for hours, chasing a payout. Pachinko is illegal gambling in all but name, threaded carefully through a loophole that keeps it just inside the law. Here's how it works. Inside the parlor, you do not win money. You win more of those little steel balls, which you then exchange for prizes, or for special tokens sitting on a shelf. To turn those tokens into cash, you step outside and visit a separate small window, run as its own business by a different operator, which buys the tokens back for money. Because the parlor itself never hands you cash, and the exchange counter is legally a separate concern, the letter of the anti-gambling law is technically satisfied, even though everyone from the player to the police understands exactly what has happened. It is a fiction that the whole society has agreed to accept. This arrangement has lasted for decades and grown into an enormous part of daily life, with parlors glowing on street corners in every city and small town, their rows of machines chiming through the afternoon. For many people, it is simple recreation, a way to pass a few hours. In countries where casino-style gambling is tightly licensed, taxed, or banned outright, this open, everyday workaround, sitting on nearly every high street, is a genuine curiosity. It is a very Japanese solution to a very Japanese tension, honoring the letter of the rule while bending its spirit in broad daylight, and doing so with a straight face that no one is expected to question. The ninth and final thing runs the other way, and I include it because it is the mirror image of everything else, something required here that is almost unheard of abroad. Before you can register and own a car in most of Japan, you must first prove that you have somewhere to park it. This is the Shako Shomeisho, the proof of parking certificate. You take it to the police, showing that you have secured a legitimate parking space for the vehicle, whether on your own land or in a rented spot near your home. And only then are you allowed to complete the registration and put the car on the road. No parking space, no car. It is that simple and that firm. To most drivers in other countries, this sounds astonishing. You buy a car, you drive it home, you park it wherever you can find room along the street, and that is the end of it. Here, in a land where space is precious and the streets are narrow and crowded and every meter of ground has a use, the law insists that every car have a home of its own before it ever turns a wheel, so that vehicles do not clog the roads and choke the neighborhoods overnight. The rule keeps the streets clear for traffic and for the fire trucks that must reach a burning house down a lane barely wide enough to pass. It is not a freedom, and it is not a ban. It is an obligation, a small piece of civic order that grows directly out of the geography and density of these crowded islands, where crowding many lives into a small space has always demanded a little more discipline from each of us. In its own way, it captures the whole spirit of this list, law shaped by the particular life of a particular place. So there you have our 9. The age of consent that stood at 13 for over a century before rising to 16, cousin marriage carried down from the Meiji era, defamation that can punish even the truth, the whaling in marine foods rooted in the culture of the sea, cigarettes from a street machine and smoke still curling in a few old bars, alcohol sold the same way and drunk freely in public, pachinko, gambling wearing a careful disguise, and the quiet demand that a car prove it has a place to sleep before it may be owned at all. Look at them together and a pattern rises to the surface. None of these things exist because Japan is careless or lax. In truth, this is a country of deep order and firm expectation, and that is exactly why these exceptions are so interesting. Each one grew from something older than the law itself, from tradition, from geography, from a particular understanding of trust and honor and the weight a family name carries down through the years. What looks strange from the outside makes a certain calm sense once you stand inside it and see the history underneath, the reasons and the memories that shaped it. Law, in the end, is a mirror. It shows you what a people value and what they fear, what they will hold on to and what they are willing to bend, and where they have decided that trust may safely take the place of a rule. I will say it once more, gently, I do not recommend that you go and do any of these things, and none of this is legal advice, only a way of understanding a country I love. If walking through the customs, the history, and the surprising rules of Japan is something you enjoy, stay with me a while longer, and I will keep sharing what my grandmother taught me and what a lifetime here has shown me. Until the next one, take care of yourselves and be kind to those around.